Hello, everyone. Welcome into the Finch X podcast. I am joined by my good friend, Captain Britt. Britt, how are you doing today?
Good. How are you?
I am fantastic. This is part of a new series we're doing where we're reviewing the X-Men movies of the X-Men Fox franchise, which we now believe has come to an end. But regardless, it's fun to go back and take a look at them and kind of like reminisce, for good or for bad, on what we've got going. So this one is, of course, the movie just titled X-Men. And this movie came out in July of 2000. That was 20 coming up on 24 years ago, which does not seem like it was that long, at least to me. But there's some interesting facts about this movie. This movie, an X-Men movie had been wanted to be made by Hollywood going all the way back to the 80s. It was one of the most popular Marvel, comic book titles that was out there. It bounced around for a ton of time, changed studios. At one point in time, James Cameron was hired to direct, and that eventually fell through. Bryan Singer, who did end up directing it, was actually hired in 96, a full 4 years before the movie actually came out. And it did eventually come out. But I think the most important thing about this movie, it had a budget of $75 million, and it made 296 at the box office. So it was definitely a financial success. And personally, I feel as though it doesn't get the credit that it deserves purely for the financial success side of it, because I firmly believe that if this movie is not a success, the MCU does not happen. Because this was very in the early stages of, because Hollywood had given up on comic book movies. They tried it in the 80s. It didn't work very well. This movie predated the first Tobey Maguire Spider-Man. And between that and Tobey Maguire, studio started saying, hey, these movies can make money, especially these Marvel movies. We should start making more of them. And then sometimes they made some not great ones. But all in all, it was a financial success, led to Marvel deciding to start its own studio. We get the MCU, and now here we are today. So, Brittany, we're just going to hop right into this thing, man. Looking back on this movie and the times you've seen it, I guess I would just say, what are your initial impressions of it?
Well, I don't remember seeing it in theaters, but I remember seeing it when I was younger, obviously in 2000. Um, I was like 10 or 9 when that came out. Everybody liked Logan. I thought it was cool, but it's not my favorite X-Men movie. I feel like as they went along, they got better. But I understand you have to establish origins and where everybody's coming from. But yeah, the Senate, was it the senator who was like one of the main guys?
Mm-hmm.
Just don't like that guy. I think I also don't like the actor very much. And he got all gross like in the movie, and I don't know. It wasn't appealing to me as a kid. But like just Logan being super cool. I like that he kind of teamed up with Rogue at first in the beginning until they got to like Xavier's. Overall, I thought it was really cool for like a comic book movie, and I was already familiar with it having watched the original X-Men animated series and like X-Men Evolution. I can't remember if that came out. I think it came out after the movie, right? I'm not sure what the
I'm gonna,
timeline with
you know what?
that.
I'm actually gonna look that up because there was also Wolverine and the X-Men, which I believe came out after the animated series. So I am just gonna look it up real quick because I am interested into, because I was sort of like of the thing where, after, oh, here we go, X-Men Evolution right here. Yeah,
See?
also began in the year 2000. So it began the same year this movie came out.
Okay, so then there was a decent amount of X-Men media out in this within the same year that appealed to both adults and children. So I was obviously already familiar with the characters. Like I said, the story itself on first watch or the first couple of watches, like don't get me wrong, I had the DVDs as a kid too. Like I didn't completely write it off. Like I still liked it. It just wasn't my favorite X-Men movie. But yeah, I mean, as far as early comic book movies, I think it did fine for what it was given. And like I said, starting origin stories and kind of like building up every movie has to do that. I think a lot of people say, "Oh, I didn't like Captain America: The First Avenger because it's a boring origin story." But like you have to start somewhere.
Mhm.
And then like you said, the MCU probably wouldn't have been a success because since it garnered so much, um, what is it, just a lot of money that like blew past the budget, that kind of made way for like Tobey's Spider-Man movies because those came out in like 2002, 2004, 2006. And that was like 2 years within each other. And then you had like Fantastic Four. I don't remember when that came out. And you had Fantastic Four 2. And a lot of people hated on those, especially Fantastic Four, which I didn't. I loved Fantastic Four, like the original. I was a big fan of like Jessica Alba. I thought Chris Evans did a great job as being like super cocky Johnny Storm. Um, and I obviously loved the Tobey Maguire movie. So yeah, I think you're right. It doesn't get a lot of credit for how much money it garnered based off of the budget alone. And I don't think it gets much credit for having started like the superhero standard and beyond.
Hmm.
Because if Fox didn't like branch out and try to do these movies, then Sony wouldn't have branched out and tried to do Spider-Man, which, like you said, eventually it was just kind of like a domino effect to where Marvel decided to create its own thing. And I think every time I had watched a Toby movie for nostalgia, it was like, oh, Marvel Inc. and then Marvel Entertainment and Marvel something. Like every movie, like it was like, oh, and associated with Marvel, and then it changed its name until like we have now Marvel Studios. So I mean, I agree. I don't think we would be here if it wasn't for X-Men. So I do love the movie, but it's not my
Yeah.
favorite.
Well, and I also think a lot of the ways this movie has to be judged for the time that it came out.
Right,
Like
exactly.
when you watch it now, 24 years later, special effects wise and stuff, it holds up pretty well.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, and the X-Men are a very difficult thing to introduce that world and do a story all in an hour and a half. Like
And to
that's
make it believable and not to like I don't want to say like cheesy, I guess.
mhm.
Like the whole line, oh, what do you expect? Blue and yellow spandex or whatever. So you have to think, the costume designers also did have a time making regular outfits for the characters as well as like their battle ready outfits. Like they did what they could, like you said, with the time. And I the special effects do hold up really well. And a lot of it was practical effects too, which is cool, which I don't think is used a lot of these days,
Mhm.
which bothers me because, practical effects is awesome. People put so much work into that.
Right, yeah. And they, from what I understand, Bryan Singer, the director of this movie, originally didn't want the X-Men characters in costume at all. Like obviously right off the bat, he's discounting like the whole okay, we're not going to do the comic book accurate
Right.
because it's
Yeah.
just going to look stupid.
Mhm.
So he was like almost, from what I understand, almost going to have them in like street clothes.
Hmm.
But one of the, I believe, production people was like, had come up with the idea, basically these like leather sort of like biker suits, and
Mhm.
actually off on the side without telling Bryan Singer, like mocked up a couple and then showed them to him. And that kind of changed his mind to be like, oh, okay, well, that at least gives it a little bit more of a, a uniform thing. This movie came out, I was 20 years old when this movie came out. I was so excited. Been, huge X-Men fan since I was a kid. Couldn't wait to see it live action. My favorite
Mhm.
character in the whole world was Wolverine. And have been debating for years and years and years where if they made an X-Men live action movie, who would they cast as Wolverine? People tossed around ideas everywhere from Tom Cruise to Glenn Danzig. I think Wizard Magazine even mentioned one time. And I'll never forget. I remember when this happened. I had a job and I was actually working with an Australian. I had a coworker that I had who was born and raised in Australia, came to San Diego Comic Con one year, met a woman there, fell in love who was an American, and stayed and got his green
Wow.
card and everything. And so we worked together. He was also a humongous comic. Obviously, went to San Diego Comic Con. He was a huge
Yeah.
comic book nerd. And
Wow. Good for him.
when the news broke that they had signed Hugh Jackman to play Wolverine, he was infuriated. He was beyond angry because Hugh
Because
Jackman,
Wolverine is Canadian
well,
and Hugh
and it's also
Jackman is
because
Australian.
Hugh Jackman was not known for action. In
Oh, okay.
Australia, he was known for doing a lot of show tunes and stage plays, and he was an accomplished dancer. And this is
Mhm.
who you signed to play Wolverine? Are you kidding me? Well, 24 years later, he's about to play it again in Wolverine and Deadpool that's coming out. So clearly, success-wise, that turned out well. The role of Wolverine was originally written for Russell Crowe, in that movie,
Whoa.
and he turned it down, but recommended, of course, Russell Crowe being Australian,
Mhm.
recommended. He was the one who recommended Hugh Jackman. Hugh Jackman was a
Well,
really
bless Russell Crowe.
right. We will always be thankful for him.
Yeah.
Hugh Jackman was a really late addition to this movie. Like they were well into pre-production when yeah, and I think it was just a few weeks before they started filming was when they signed
Wow.
him. So they arranged this movie in such a way where any of the scenes where you see Hugh Jackman with his shirt off were like the last scenes that were filmed because he was
Mm.
pumping iron like crazy during the entire time, trying to
Got
like get some semblance of buff to be like what Wolverine looked like. Now Wolverine, I'm off on a tangent. Well, this
Oh,
was
you're
so
fine.
fun. I don't know if you've noticed this as these movies go along, but in the comic books, Wolverine is 5'3". Hugh
Mhm.
Jackman's like 6'2". So when they did the first, that was the only thing like Bryan Singer and the casting director didn't like about Hugh Jackman was how tall he was. So
Yeah.
they spent a lot of time in the first movie, especially putting the other actors in platform shoes or doing camera angles so that Hugh Jackman looked significantly shorter than them. As the movies went on, they just stopped caring. They're like, whatever. It's huge. That's he's no longer Logan. He's Hugh Jackman. So it is what it is. So,
Yeah.
but
Hey, you know
yeah.
what? He has great hair though for Logan. Well, had great hair.
Oh yes, you're still bitter about that, aren't you?
I am. Yeah. I had to bring it up just really quick. Yeah.
Yeah, the Rogue in this movie, I'm still to this day not sure how I feel about it. Like I get what they were going with, because Wolverine, Jubilee always had that kind of relationship in the comics. Wolverine and Kitty Pryde always had that kind of so they sort of established that. It's a great way to establish the story. Wolverine and this young girl walking into Xavier's for the first time, seeing this whole world.
Right.
The reason why Rogue in this movie didn't have the flight and the super strength and all that stuff is because Fox did not have the rights to Miss Marvel. And so therefore could
Interesting.
not explain the origin story as to how she got those powers when that's not technically genetically part of her mutant power set. So instead she's just a teenage girl who can't touch people.
Huh. That's interesting. Yeah. I mean, like I said, I watched a lot of the X-Men animated shows. Um, Obviously the original X-Men animated show came out when I was younger. So I couldn't quite remember what exactly Rogue's powers were. And I honestly had forgotten that she could fly. So when I saw her in the first X-Men movie, I was like, that's it? Like I could have sworn there was more, but it never like came across for me to be like, oh, like we'll Google it or something, or like look it up in a comic book and just figure it out that way. And I'm gonna be real transparent and say it wasn't until I saw X-Men 97 I was like, "Oh my God, she is powerful." I completely forgot because the movies just completely erased it for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, "Oh, well she just can't touch people." That's what they like dumbed her down to. Not obviously not on purpose because of like legal reasons, but yeah, that specific rogue from the movies just stuck with me and I'm just like, "Oh my God, she's a badass." Like it's a shame they didn't get to see that part of her, because it just was so her character was just so boxed in. Like, I can't touch anybody. I'm sad and angry about it, but I can't do anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of what it was left to.
Yeah, and she was one of the people that didn't get character wise didn't get their proper due in the series and all the film series. Like for
Yeah,
so
not
much of that could have been, and she pretty much spent the movies just kind of being a scared girl who just couldn't touch people.
yeah.
Which did help tell the story of how sometimes young mutants will have abilities that freak them out, freak themselves out, and make them afraid to exist. Xavier's is kind of the place for them to sort of like be that way. And the other one who never got her just doing these films is Storm. Like anybody who's watched the animated series or even watched X-Men 97 know like what an Omega level badass she is.
Hmm.
And I feel like in these movies, especially in the first one, they didn't know what to do with her. Like, first of all, you had Halle Berry, who was very early in her career and couldn't decide from scene to scene whether she was doing a British accent or an African accent. It was really bizarre. And then yeah, she was just kind of there to just have a few lines, and that was just to be an
And
extra
she
spot
was
on the
just kind of
roster.
like the heavy hitter if they and I say that in air quotes because like we did talk like I watched this a month ago, maybe like sometime in April. We're in May, so I just distinctly remember I was like, really? Toad took her out? Like, come on. There's no way. So yeah, she was just in there to be like a heavy hitter. They didn't give any backstory to her, but like I guess like obviously now you can see that they didn't have rights to like a lot of stuff. They didn't have enough time to expand on each character. They were just like, here are the characters, you know who they are. We don't have to explain it to you. Blah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and they were sort of in a position where Fox gave them a budget to make this movie, but it wasn't a ginormous budget, and they were constantly freaked out about it. And if the movie had pushed over budget, it probably could have caused problems. And the all the original scripts, Nightcrawler, Beast, and Angel were in the film as well, and they were cut
Huh.
last minute purely due to budget reasons. They were like, that's going to take more special effects, that's going to be more practical effects, that's going to be,
Yeah.
harder to do. Um, Storm, I feel like Storm got the worst of it, and I did read an interesting story. I can't remember the guy's name who was hired to direct the third X-Men movie, X-Men: The Last Stand.
Last stand.
And he looked at the script, and the original script had an opening scene where Storm is in Africa, and like villages or the countryside is on fire, and she brings about a rainstorm to douse the fire and save the people, and she's regarded as a goddess and all this stuff. The director read it and said, "Wow, this is actually a really cool opening scene." And the producer, like one of the bigwigs at Fox Studios, said, "Yeah, that's purely in the script to get Halle Berry to sign on for the third movie. Once she signs on, we're throwing all that away." And the director quit over it. He's like, "Then I'm not doing it." He's like,
Damn,
that's dirty." And of
that
course, yeah,
is
of course, Halle Berry did sign on to do the third one, and none of that was in the movie. Which is like terrible. Like we saw what a
bullshit.
badass she was in X-Men '97. Imagine that in live action. Like that could have been like
Yeah.
some Omega level shit.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm surprised she signed on for Days of Futures Past after that. But I mean, then again, didn't she like die in the first couple minutes too?
Yeah, she wasn't in that movie a whole bunch. She did die.
Yeah, she got
Um,
shot by Sentinels, I think, while she
yeah,
was trying to like make fog to cover them, if I'm
yeah,
not
she
mistaken.
she got stabbed
Oh yeah,
in
because they
the
had that like power too. They weren't just like blasties, they were like stabbies.
crazy Morphe Sentinels that didn't make any sense.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah. Also interesting note, if anybody wants to go back and watch the movie, towards the beginning of the movie, when Rogue hitchhikes with a trucker, and they get to
Oh.
this town, Laughlin Station, I believe it called. The truck driver is
Mhm.
played by George Buza, who is the voice of Beast in X-Men the animated series and X-Men '97.
Whoa,
Yeah, fun little like thing that he just kind of like
that's
popped in there.
cool.
And I didn't even know that until like 6 months ago when
That's
somebody
dope.
told me that, and I went and looked it up and went, holy cow, that is him. Wow.
So I love that you're full of like random X-Men facts. You're like a well of them. It's one of my
That's
favorite things.
that's one of my running jokes, is that my mother always told me that my X-Men knowledge would take me somewhere. I just never believed her. And now here I am doing a podcast about it. But yeah, of course we got Patrick Stewart as Professor X. That had been fan casted like ever since Star Trek The Next Generation came out. Everybody got one look at Patrick Stewart and was like, that guy's got to be Professor X. Like
Yeah,
no,
he's
no,
perfect.
yeah, nobody else could do Professor, especially back then. I don't mean to be mean. He was significantly younger 24 years ago. We all were. But
Yeah.
yeah, and Ian McClellan playing Eric Lensher, aka Magneto, of which
Mhm.
he was extremely hesitant to take the role. He didn't want to until they showed him the costume he would have. And he thought it looked so cool. He's like, okay, I'll do it.
Like I'm in.
Right, yeah. Yeah. And I think those were his pre-Gandalf days. I'm pretty sure that,
Oh,
yeah, that was a precursor. That came out before Lord of the Rings.
so he's a
Um,
badass in every realm.
yeah, yeah, he's got Dumbledore. He played Dumbledore, right? I've only seen the first Harry Potter, so I don't
No,
know. He
no,
was
he just
he was some
Dumbledore.
character in there, wasn't he? Was he in Harry Potter at
No,
all?
I'm
No.
pretty sure he wasn't.
Am I
No.
just like gaslighting myself into thinking
You're-
that's like
I
anytime
thought
there?
you were just poking fun because Gandalf's got a long beard like Dumbledore. No, he's not
Yeah,
in Harry Potter. If I'm
yeah.
wrong, somebody tell me. Somebody shoot me a message right now and let me know
No,
and be like, you were wrong. On the podcast, you were wrong.
you're probably right. They all blend together with me after a while.
Yeah,
So
no, that's fair. Long bearded wizards, there you go.
it would make sense that like if But if somebody walked up and told me that he was in it, I'd be like, okay, yeah, sure. I'm fine with it. Like,
On a quick thing, somebody actually DM'd me either this morning or last night about the animated series. When they were doing the Magneto Protocol thing, not to like go on a quick tangent.
hmm,
When I think it was President Kelly, he right before he closed the folder that said the Magneto Protocol, it said aliases under Magneto. And did you see Ian and Michael underneath it?
yes. Uh-huh.
That was so cool. It was
It
such a nice
was.
little Easter egg.
That's one of the
I
things
thought
I
that was
love about
dope.
X-Men 97. They throw those in there. And of course, there was the line from the first X-Men movie, that we're talking about where, Logan puts on the zip up leather motorcycle suit and he says, "You guys actually go outside in these things?" And, Cyclops says, "Would you prefer yellow spandex?"
Yeah.
And then we got the flip side of that in X-Men 97 when Cyclops throws the X-Men uniform at Cable and Cable, and he says, "What'd you expect? Black
Black
leather?"
leather.
Like,
Yeah. Now that line's always gonna remind me of Stephania
yes.
every single time.
Yes, I know. She went totally Mandela effect on that thing. That was so funny.
She
It's what
gaslit herself.
yeah.
We love you.
Yeah, yeah, we do it. And yeah, it was one of those and for folks who know, we were doing an Instagram live talking about episode 9 of X-Men 97 and with myself, Brittany, Stefania, and was Dylan in on that one?
No, it was
Oh, it
your
was
wife.
Jamie. It was my wife. Shit.
Oh my God, I butchered Stefania. What did I say? I'm terrible. My whole brain set is not here today. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I say Stefania. What's wrong with me?
I
I'm
don't
so
know. I've
that
done it in the past too. That's why I just kind of like got to the point of calling her Steph so I don't embarrass myself. Um just
works. That works. I'm so
just
sorry, Steph.
just keep it simple. And
I owe you one.
yeah, I think it'll be all right. But yeah, this Toad in this
Oh yeah.
movie.
What about Toad?
Ray Park, who played Darth Maul in Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace.
This is the
Uh
same guy? Oh my
Same
God.
guy, same guy. And you can see the little bit of a nod to it when he's fighting Storm and kind of like kicks her and he's got like a quarter staff and kind of does a little twirl with it sort of thing. And you're like, okay, yeah, yeah, we get it. You're Darth Maul. Okay. Yeah.
Wow, that goes to show you I don't look up on IMDb people's like, actors. Shame on me. That was really cool. See, you're an infinite well of X-Men facts.
Infinite Well. Have you here's an interesting question because this is like a puzzling thing. Joss Whedon. Are you familiar with Joss Whedon?
Yeah, yeah.
So he's like the guy who, for people of my generation, was like our greatest hero before he became a social pariah, within the past couple of years and basically got blacklisted in the industry. But at one point in time, he was hired to write a script for this movie. And
Hmm.
he wrote a script, submitted it, probably got paid for it. The movie went through so many rewrites that from the Joss Whedon script, only 2 lines survived to what actually made it on film. And the first one was when Wolverine when they're at the Statue of Liberty and Wolverine comes around the corner and Cyclops says, "Well, prove it's you," and Wolverine says, "You're a dick." And Cyclops goes, "Okay, yeah, that was a Joss Whedon line." The other one was, "Do you know what happens to a toad when it gets hit by lightning? The same thing that happens to everything else." Those were the 2 Joss Whedon lines that survived and actually made it to the
Nice.
final cut.
Those are good lines.
Yeah, they are. They are. More X-Men knowledge for you. So, yeah, we had a thing where we established a lot of characters, and they established Sabretooth. And that was the one
Oh,
other downside of that movie is they never bothered to get into his back history because, like, to the casual viewer, like, okay, here's Wolverine with these claws, and he like stabs them multiple times, and Sabretooth just pushes them off, like, get off me. Like anybody else, they're dead. But they never bothered to explain like how it is that he just survived that okay and everything was fine. And yeah.
dude, I hated that man's eyebrows. I get they were going for like a comic look, but it was too cheesy for me. They could have did a little bit better. Like I think I had mentioned to you before, I like the more like toned down look of Sabretooth from X-Men Origins, and I think that actor did a great job. But the one in the first one, like his eyebrows were like handlebar mustaches, but on his eyebrows. And I'm just like, but they pointed down instead of up, and I'm like,
Right.
why? Or I don't know what they were pointing in some direction, but the point is they were way too big.
They
And
had
like,
part to them. Like they were
yeah,
long enough they had bangs. They
Yeah.
were like,
Yeah, and then like his just like long-haired wig and the gross nails they put on him. Like I get he's supposed to be unappealing, but like I don't know, like even the nails on the guy in Origins, like that was cool. It was still gross, but it was cooler. Like you could tell they were just like press on cheap, really thick acrylic nails in the first movie.
hmm
Yeah, that guy didn't appeal to me. Like, I don't know. I guess it was intentional, making him look like unappealing, like Toad was gross looking. I always thought he was gross looking since I was a kid. I still do now. I'm just like, ugh.
Yeah, I'm the same way. Like he's a character for me. It's like an instant turn off. We were at C2E2 and my good friend Dylan was like, "Oh, I'm cosplaying Toad." I'm like, "Ugh,
I
ugh."
have seen his Toad though. I do like his Toad.
Yeah, yeah. He's more
Yeah.
comic accurate, which is way better than film accurate Toad. Like film accurate Toad was just like, oh, I wanted to
Film
hit him with a
accurate
power
Toad
washer.
looks just as bad as Amazing Spider-Man 2 Hobgoblin.
Oh
That
yes,
was just such a bad look. I mean, like,
yes,
I know I said I love practical effects, but like, there's a way to do practical effects wrong, and I think that was kind of it.
right, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I know they didn't want to go like full Green Goblin because they did it previously with Toby, but like, I don't know. I think that could have been better. I mean, I know the whole storyline was like Harry was sick, and that's why he looked like that. I don't know. That's just me. I could just be nitpicky. Who knows?
No, I agree.
Anybody
That
else have
whole
opinions?
the fact that Hobgoblin was in that movie, period, was kind of like a dumb to begin with. That was like where that whole
We're
movie
like,
started going
didn't
off
you
the
learn
rails.
from Spider-Man 3?
Yeah, I know.
Too many villains.
Shove too much into one movie. Um, but yeah, the X-Men, this movie, really, really, really basic storyline.
Hmm.
You have Xavier, you have Magneto. Magneto wants to do a militant thing for his kind. The X-Men have to stop them. Like
Yep.
that's her storyline. The storylines get way more intricate as we move along.
Oh yeah.
But for the I guess for the probably the initial introduction, that's the most you can ask for. Like, because if they try to get a super like if you tried to open this thing up with Days of Future Past, everybody'd be like, what is happening? I don't even
Yeah.
know who these people are. Why should I care?
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's why Days of Future Past worked because you already learned you had like the first class cast and then you had the original cast like melded together. I think that's what made it work for the nostalgia and for you already having feelings for certain characters
hmm
in both like I don't want to say franchises because it's the same thing, but like both
Generations?
generation. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a good. I would say eras, but that word's too overused.
It is not. It's just because you don't like Taylor Swift. Um, the
I mean, whatever. If she appears as Dazzler, I'm just like, stay away from my comics, please.
it'll be the greatest movie ever if that happens. Um,
Yeah, 100%. I want to see 3 movies of Taylor Swift as Dazzler. Watch, somebody's gonna make a meme out of that.
yeah, just do
But
just if Taylor could just do an Eras tour as Dazzler, that would be amazing. Oh my God, I would
Michelle would
mortgage.
love that.
I know, I would too. I'd mortgage my house to like follow her to every stop. Um, but yeah, the one thing we didn't touch on though, and I thought this was a really really good move on the film's part, is this whole movie opens with young Magneto, young Eric, as a
Yes.
prisoner
Mhm.
at a Holocaust camp. You know, being a
Yeah.
Jewish child, having that tattoo of the serial number on his arm, which
Mhm.
through all of media since then has not changed. Like the same tattoo that Magneto has in X-Men 97 is the same one that Magneto has in the film series. The
Mhm.
same numbers, same spot, everything.
Yeah.
To really give the motivation of understanding like where that character is coming from, of him
Yeah.
now being like an adult and seeing mutants and sort of being like, I know where this goes. Like at first they start
Yeah.
talking about laws and they talk about doing this sensibly, and then before you know it, they're putting chains on people and herding them off into camps. And
Mhm.
I'm not going to let that happen again, which I always appreciated X-Men wise. It was one of the things I always enjoyed about the story is that it was more than just bad guy, we go fight bad guy. Like
Yeah,
there's like
absolutely. Like
layers of
he's
gray to
seen
this.
the worst in humanity and he knows that they're capable of it again, which is why he's so adamant about his brethren mutants
hmm
keeping them safe.
Yeah.
So, yeah, no, that is a very powerful opening scene and he's crying out for his mom, his parents and he's got his hand reaching out for them in turn, which is where most of his power, he could do it from like it radiates from his head, but like the I want to say the typical like the more well known, he's always has a hand outstretched to control magnetism. So that kind of was really iconic and just like a callback to his iconic look of how he poses when he's ready to like manipulate metal.
Hmm.
I'm so sorry. The dogs like distracted me, so I had a hard time getting that out. They were fighting with each other out there. I was like, I hope he can't hear that. So my window open. Yeah, I had a rough time bringing that out. But yeah, it was a really powerful scene and it really started it off. Like you hit the ground running with that. And you can see how strong he was even then, especially in emotion and distress and the trauma he was going through. Because it took like what 4 guys to hold him down. And even then, he was still pulling the guys while pulling himself closer to the gate and opening the gate. And it took a guy literally knocking him out with a gun to get him to stop.
Hmm.
So yeah, that was really powerful way to open the first scene of the movie. And I think they did that something similar in First Class, right?
Yeah, X-Men First Class, they kind of picked up that scene and what happened immediately after. And
Yeah,
sort of,
with the coin.
yeah, and Sebastian Shaw bringing in Eric and being like, hey, let me see what you can do. I know you're powerful, like, and
Mhm.
sort of like more trauma manipulating him, into a period of distress to get him to use his power. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's great because there's no way any kid doesn't come out of that severely traumatized
Right.
and doesn't come out of it like permanent PTSD of like never again. Like it's like
Mhm.
probably one of the best motivators of any story as to why a person who's an antagonist in a story feels the way they do.
Yeah, like especially in the 97, like we can talk about that another time, but just to touch on when it was like when the Genosha was getting attacked and he was like, never again will we wonder how many we could have saved. It
Hmm.
kind of reminded me of like that part in the Schindler's List towards the end of the movie where he was like, I could have saved more. I should have sold my car. I should have did this. And it didn't like closely parallel it, but it reminded me like familiarities in between because he just doesn't want it to happen again. He wants to save everybody. And that's kind of what like the main character of the Schindler's List was trying to do. From what I remember, I have not watched it in quite a long time, but that part always like stuck out to me because he's like out of sorts. He's like, I could have done more. I could have saved more. I could have saved more people. I should have did this. I should have did that. And that's basically what's going through Magneto's mind the whole time. Like all of this stuff's happening in like all of the movies and obviously in the 97 series.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that I always felt like there would have to be, if you were that kind of person, child who lived through that, you would come away with
Mhm.
that with a ton of survivor's guilt. And you would think about it
Mhm. Oh,
all the time.
100%.
Yeah, about
Yeah.
how much you could have done. Why dare you, the one who survived, yada, yada, yada. And then when you see any semblance of something like that repeating itself, yeah, naturally you're going to
Mhm.
freak out. Naturally, you're going to do everything in your power and fight like hell to keep it from getting to that point again.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. Anybody would,
Right.
especially somebody who's gone through it
Mm.
firsthand.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I loved about that part, like the fact that that scene, that like the movie opens with that scene. Because if we don't
Mhm.
have that scene, like you have zero, zero, zero sympathy for Magneto in this movie. Like you're just
Right. You
like,
just think he's the guy who wants to take over because he feels like he's powerful.
yeah, he's a bad guy and we have to stop him. Like that's every superhero story ever, right? You know.
Hmm.
Yeah, giving him that motivation. I always feel like every story. And I think this was something that was bred into the MCU, and I think a lot of times this is what make the MCU so great. Is I feel like a superhero story or any hero story is only as good as the villain story is.
Hmm.
And through a lot of the best of the MCU movies, they spent a ton of screen time on the quote unquote bad guy of the story,
Hmm.
and that makes it like what a great character Loki was.
Yeah.
Like, what a great character Ultron was. What a phenomenal character Thanos was.
Hmm.
Like, that guy got so much screen time in Infinity War. Like, you knew he
Oh
was a
yeah.
bad guy. You knew he needed to be stopped, but you also understood where he was coming from.
Right, because they gave you enough time to see like their reasoning and why they were doing what they were doing. Like Ultron talked all the time. And not as a bad thing. Like you got to understand like why he got to the place he was and why he was going to such extremes. I mean, obviously there weren't the right reasons. He thought humanity was like humanity's going to end up killing itself. They keep doing stuff over and over again. He's like, I can do things better than humanity. I'm better than humanity. And then you have Thanos, who's like, I've seen suffering kind of like Magneto. I don't want that to happen, and I want everything to be balanced. Like, I don't want anything to be in imbalance. So that was like his core goal, balance. And Ultron's was just evolution from humanity, not in like a mutation gene way, obviously, but in like a higher technological power kind of way, I guess. And then Loki, you see him as a good villain because you get to see his origin. Like he was taken from his realm. He was adopted into this family. He never felt good enough. He never really knew where he came from what I remember. I have not watched the first Thor in a long time. And then he had just like such an amazing arc over the entire course of the MCU, but you understood his reasoning for him being so mischievous, him quote unquote hating Thor, him wanting to do things the way he wanted to do them, him always stabbing people or dying. It wasn't just like oh, we have this character, he's a jerk, so he's the villain.
Mhm.
Like there's no other reason but he just wants to watch the world burn. Like there are reasons to why they were villains. And there's enough screen time and, enough time spent on the script to explain why the villains became villains, but they don't ever see themselves as villains. They're just trying to fulfill like a prophecy they made up in their head.
Mhm.
They think they're doing a good thing. And that's also what makes a good villain because they all, what's the quote? Like every villain thinks they're the hero of their own story, but they're not.
Right. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've always like this is what I always loved about the Magneto character, and that I firmly believe that the difference between the hero and the villain is the hero gets hurt and says, I won't let anyone else get hurt. The
Hmm.
villain gets hurt and says, I got hurt, I'm going to hurt back.
Yeah.
And Magneto's right in between those two. Like he
Hmm.
exists in this fine line right in between both of those. He's acting because he feels like he needs to protect his kind. Protect his
Hmm.
kind, he has no problem hurting others. So it
Right.
ends up this really like, and that's what makes him such a fun character, and that's why whether it was like the X-Men movies or the original animated series, or especially now X-Men 97. I mean, God, season one of X-Men 97, we got so much time with Magneto. And they
Yeah.
really did a great job of that, of writing it, of like moving the needle in terms of how you felt about the way you felt about him when he first showed up at the end of episode one was not the way you felt about him at the end of episode 10.
Oh, absolutely not. Like opinions shifted up and down, all the way till the last episode. And even it was more apparent, especially when he kind of had that breakdown moment in the bar right before it started filling up. And he was like, why can't I see my parents' faces? Like I search for them in strangers' like eyes or their faces too, and I just can't see them. And then Charles is just like, you've experienced so much pain and like rage and anger. It's like clouding your memory. That's why you can't remember them. And you really understand that he's just, like we've been talking about, he's just a man who went through a very traumatic thing, along with the survivor's guilt, him not seeing his parents again, friends and family he knew and loved, have not been able to. Well, I don't think anybody could ever actually get through that. I mean, you'd need
Mm-hmm.
extensive therapy, but even then, I don't think anybody can fully recover from that. But, he didn't have good outlets. And he was just, like you said, kind of in that gray area, like hating humans for what they did and wanting to protect his kind. So, not wanting his kind to suffer what he suffered, but he doesn't care what happens to the humans as long as his kind doesn't suffer. So, it's very like, it's like balanced and imbalanced at the same time. Like he's just like kind of tipping the scales on you have good reasons, but the good reasons don't outweigh the bad things you're willing to do for those good reasons. So it's just always kind of like it's never here. It's never
Mm-hmm.
black and white. It's always like gray.
Yeah,
Maybe that was
absolutely.
wrong. It's never black or white. It's gray.
Great.
One of those. But you get what I'm trying to say.
100%. And that's always felt like that's the great thing about the Magneto era character is that he's kind of like that's why at times he can be very much an ally of the X-Men, depending upon what happens. And at other
Yeah.
times, he is their worst nemesis,
Hmm.
depending upon which way those scales happen to be balancing in any particular moment. And I think introducing him the way they did in this movie and getting that as his motivation to do what it is he wants to do is that he wants to do this thing, where he's gonna like, turn everybody in New York City, especially everybody at this big UN gala, into
Mhm.
mutants, so that way they will understand what it's like to be a mutant. Of course,
Yeah.
his experiment went horribly wrong earlier, and as we know from X-Men 97, X-Men the animated series, Senator Kelly, who became President Kelly, same character that was Senator Kelly, who was the guy they did all the experiments on, who turned into like Jellyfish Man and exploded into like a water
Ew.
balloon on a table. Like
Yeah. That happened to who was he standing with? Was it Storm or was
it
it Jean?
it was Storm, and it was when Storm was like in one of
Yeah.
the scenes where she was attempting to do an African accent after
Oh,
not doing it prior to or after that. I don't
I
know.
don't
It's
remember that. I'm gonna have to rewatch that scene, even though that's like one of the worst scenes for me.
yeah.
The jelly goo H2O water that he just turned into. I was just like, oh,
Yeah. And as a side note, how do you feel about cleaning that up? Like, do you just go down there with a
right.
mop and just like wring it out? Like, it's a dude, but on the other hand, it's water. Like,
Yeah.
we're going to collect it and put it in a special urn.
Jar.
Here,
Yeah.
you know,
See-through jar urn. I don't know.
right. The one other character that I did want to talk about in this movie was Mystique. For
Yeah.
those of us who know Mystique from the comics, blue skin, yellow eyes, typically with a white dress that's armless and very high cut. Um, it's to a degree, I guess I would say, understandable why they didn't go with that look in live action. Obviously having Rebecca Romaine play Mystique at the time was very like, ooh, because she was like the Sports Illustrated model like at the time, and she's going to be completely naked in this movie, but painted blue and and covered in scales, of which the prosthetics for that alone took her like 9 hours in the makeup chair
Damn.
every day just to get it, just to go shoot.
She should have
And
got paid the most.
yeah, she should have. And I remember there were all kinds of like stipulations, like within like, I don't know what it was, 24 hours or 48 hours of filming, she wasn't allowed to fly or have certain drinks or foods because it would have changed the chemistry of her
Appearance.
skin and the
Yeah.
prosthetics wouldn't adhere. And yeah, it was like a nightmare.
Damn.
I still to this day, I'm not gonna lie, I like the way they used her character because it was relatively comic accurate in terms of her attitude and motivations. I never was a big fan of the look though. I didn't I still to this day don't know how I feel about it. Like I wasn't a fan of the scaly look, but I don't know, maybe they
Was it the
felt like
hair too slick back as well, like super short and super close to like her
yeah,
head? That
yeah.
really like I didn't the scales didn't bother me too much. I mean, I thought it was a cool look. I'd never really seen anything like it aside from like, for example, like you brought up really like Darth Maul, that's something you don't see every day. Especially prior to that, you didn't really see anything like that before. So I mean, I was intrigued, but I also like it wasn't my favorite look. I mean, Toad and Sabretooth are the low bar. I mean, Meg those are the least favorite. And then the actor who played Senator Kelly, I'm just like, nah. I mean, Mystique was a very cool look, but not my favorite look. I don't want to say Jennifer Lawrence looked better, not because of like her being younger or like fitter or anything like that. Just like practical effects, CGI. I just think she kind of pulled it off better, but definitely not in First Class because they used a bunch of different blues from varying to the movies. And I think First Class she had like a very light blue, and I've always pictured her to be like a Nightcrawler blue, like your hat.
Mhm.
And I think they were at least, from what I remember, I could be wrong, so check me if I'm wrong. From what I remember, Mystique was at least very consistent in like the color of her skin in all of the original X-Men movies. Because I've seen like a side by side for the from the First Class and the Days of Futures Past movie. Jennifer Lawrence is literally different shades of blue. And not like in a good way. Like I mean, I understand like I don't do body paint makeup, but I know a lot of people cosplayers who do. So like sometimes a product is either not available anymore or it doesn't work as well as this product, and you're like, oh, I wish we had this one. So you're gonna have a different color or like a different effect when it's laying on the skin, which is totally fine. And I'm not like I'm taking that into consideration. But if it's just like a what Mystique looked cooler, I would probably say Jennifer Lawrence, I think, pulled it off. Just like a little bit better in the later ones, not in First Class.
Right, yeah. And I sort of feel like with the first three X-Men movies with Rebecca Romaine playing Mystique, they just went for consistency. Like they settled on the first movie, like this is her look, we're not messing with it. Whereas it felt like, and the Jennifer Lawrence ones, they were always tweaking it. They were always
Mhm.
making slight modifications to it. Of course, the one thing they did with Jennifer Lawrence's Mystique is that she also did spend considerable time just looking like Jennifer Lawrence because of the shape shifting ability. With Rebecca
Yeah,
Romaine, they never bothered with that. It was just she was either full Mystique look or she was impersonating somebody.
right. And I think that kind of played into the overall like message of the movies of her not being afraid of looking different. Like she was just always blue.
Hmm.
And then that also played into the first class ones where like Jennifer Lawrence and Beast kind of had a thing and then, he was like, "Well, I can't really turn this off. Blue's not a bad color." They had like that moment where they were kind of saying some cute stuff to each other and she had to kind of be like, "Well, am I going to stay in like my regular like look for Mystique or am I going to just walk around looking like Jennifer Lawrence?" So I think that aside from playing like actual like money cost effectiveness reasons, like there was also like story reasons that helped it.
Hmm.
Oh, there was one thing I didn't like about the Rebecca Romaine. Somebody was obsessed with feet in those movies. I'm just saying. She did everything with her feet, and I'm like, do your hands not exist? I don't want to look at blue feet. I'm not a feet person. It bothered me as a kid. I'm like, put shoes on. But
Hmm.
I'm still like that. I see somebody else like walking around like outside of their house on like the concrete. Sometimes I'm like, dude, put shoes on. You could hurt mainly it's like you can hurt your feet. You can like step on something sharp.
Hmm.
But yeah, in the X-Men movies, I was like, just stop, please. Like,
Right.
let her use her hands.
And I agree. And I am like by no means someone to kink shame anybody. Like, bro, if
Oh
you
no, please don't take
no, if
please.
you,
Anybody
yeah,
who's watching, do not take it as a kink
yeah,
shame.
if you're into
Not
feet,
at all.
knock yourself out.
Everybody's
But
got their thing, and you be proud of it. Mutant and proud.
but I agree in this movie there was something going on with the feet. Like, let's just be
Yeah.
honest. Like, yeah,
Mhm.
the amount of stuff she did with her feet, and I'm like, that feels like it's more work to do it that way,
Exactly,
you know?
exactly. Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, so that's our chat on the X-Men movie
We ended
from
it on
2000.
feet.
We always,
No.
yes, and that's going to become a theme. I'm going to find a way to bring it
Oh
around to feet at the end of every single one of these. That's
no.
my solemn vow. That's the dream that I have for
See
us and
what
our
we did.
yes. So hey, Britt, always love talking to you. Thank you so much for hanging out and do this thing, and we'll do this
Yeah, of
again,
course.
right?
Yeah, totally. I'm down. Again, I'm not the X-Men expert, but I'm down to join anything. So we're good.
All
I will
right.
be here for the next one.
Cool. All right. Well, we're going to get out of here, everybody. Thank you for hanging out with us, and we will see you next time.
Thanks for watching, guys. Bye.